everyone, it's Rachel Wolfson here at Consensus 2024, and I'm speaking with James Seyffart. He is the Senior Bloomberg ETF Analyst. Did I get that right, James?
I'm technically not a senior, but I might as well be for the crypto ETF stuff.
But what is your official title? Because I think I messed that up.
Research Analyst, technically. ETF Research Analyst, but lately I've been doing a lot more than just ETF research, so, but Research Analyst is what I would say.
Cool, okay. James, before we get started with today's interview, maybe tell us a little bit about your role at Bloomberg and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I work in a department at Bloomberg called Bloomberg Intelligence, and it's basically just Bloomberg's research arm. So we write research about varying topics. I have a bunch of colleagues who cover equity research, credit, fixed income, debt, commodities, you name it. We have people that cover it. And my role within my team is to cover ETFs, but really the asset management industry. Prior to doing this specific role, I was also, when I first joined the research team, I was also doing commodities work, and we started, when I joined in late 2017, this commodities analyst was like, what do you know about Bitcoin and crypto? Like, I think we should start covering it. So I actually also covered crypto from a strategy point of view, a commodity strategy point of view. So that overlap, that Venn diagram fits squarely into all these asset managers in TradFi trying to launch these crypto ETFs. So that's where I've spent a lot of my cover. I spend a lot of my time. I mean, it's not quite 50%, but it's near 50% where I'm just trying to look at the overlap between TradFi and DeFi, and mostly from an asset management point of view, but from you name it, and I'm probably looking at it trying to follow along.
Right. So let's talk about ETFs. You've been really popular on X lately. I follow you, and it seems like you're the ETF expert when it comes to the Bitcoin ETF and the ETH ETF. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, my boss and I, Eric Balchunas, have kind of blown up in the last year and change, ever since it really started with the Bitcoin futures ETFs in 2021, and now it's really gone to the Spot Ethereum ETF, Spot Bitcoin ETFs. But honestly, it's just the fact that, like I said, I had done some research. I personally was interested in the crypto and DeFi space, Bitcoin specifically, and I know the ETF space. It's literally my full-time job to know the ETF space. So there's a lot of people out there that try to think about and come up with ways and give their takes on things that are just completely nonsensical. So it's kind of makes it somewhat easier for us to come out with a more reasoned point of view and talk about what's exactly happening. So I find that's where I found a good niche in on Twitter, on X, as you say, because there's a lot of hopium dealers, as we say out there, just people hyping up all these random things that are happening, and some of it is not a big deal, some of it is, and we'll call that out, and sometimes there's things that are missed that this is a bigger deal than the crypto community is realizing. So that's kind of what I've been doing and what I focus on X.
So let's talk about the Spot Ethereum ETF. Has that passed yet?
Yes. So we actually, this is one thing we got wrong, but I think we had good reason to get it wrong. So our odds of approval were around 25% when it was ultimately approved, or we actually broke the news that it was likely going to be approved last Monday, I believe it was. Our odds, like I said, were at 25%, and then we started hearing chatter from a bunch of different sources we have. We know people at all levels of this process. We're constantly kind of trying to get people to give us information what they can and cannot share, and just kind of mosaic it all together. And multiple people were like, something's happening. And sure enough, we start reaching out to more and more people, and we realize, okay, this ETH ETF might actually get approved. And that's in contrast to everything else we had heard for months leading up to it. After the Spot Bitcoin ETF was approved in January, we were at 70% odds of an Ethereum ETF approval. We're like, it makes sense. All the steps are there for Ethereum. They should just approve these Ethereum ETFs that are coming due in May. The SEC basically stonewalled everyone, didn't interact with anyone, didn't give any information. And we talked to a bunch of different people, and they're like, yeah, there's no contact. The SEC isn't going to approve these things. They were going after consensus, not this consensus, the conference, but Joe Lubin's consensus, basically asking questions about Ethereum via security. There's a whole bunch of other things that were going on. Wells notices. The SEC was very hostile, and we were like, there's just no way this is going to happen. And we were actually contemplating, I was going to write a note probably that said we were going to lower odds from 25% to 15 or 10%. And it's funny, we only went to 90% for the Bitcoin ETF, and everyone was yelling at us like, increase it, it's obviously happening. But we always wanted to leave this little gap in case the Biden admin or some political process came in and were like, you guys can't approve these things. We had heard like rumblings that the Biden admin was looking at this and potentially, like, we think the Warren camp and people asked them to look at this and possibly stop it because they were likely to approve. So that's why we stayed at 90%. That was the 10% we left open.
Okay.
And ironically, we were at 25% for ETH, and we were going to lower it, but we were leaving it open in case some political process happened. And that's what we think happened. There's Trump, SAB 121, then we had the FIT 21 Act, which is kind of corroborating some of this. And we think this was a complete political decision. We think it was a 180 from the SEC. I think the SEC, until the week before, was planning to deny the Ethereum ETFs.
Interesting.
And it was a complete political decision. Now, there's no smoking gun that says, like, this is exactly what happened. It was fully political. But that's, all the signs are pointing there. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence.
But has it actually been passed yet?
Okay, that's a good question. That's what you asked initially.
Right, because I thought it was passed and approved, the Spot Ethereum ETF, but it may.
Yeah, so there's two process. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen before an ETF ultimately gets approved, right? There's tons of stuff that happens at the back end, but really there's two main things that need to happen. You need what's called a 19B4 approval, which is what we just got. That's essentially exchanges and the issuers partner up and apply for a rule change that basically says, I want to do X, Y, or Z. In this case, I want to list and trade Ethereum ETF, Spot Ethereum ETF. Same process happened with Bitcoin. That's the thing that was approved. But at the same time, if you remember, or your viewers remember, the Bitcoin ETFs were going through a similar process, but there was two concurrent things. There was constantly these filings that were happening, these amendments to the documents. They're called S1 documents. They're prospectuses, offering documents, whatever you want to call them. And essentially, that's another step of approval. So the 19B4, we got that approval. That's from something called the Division of Trading and Markets at the SEC. They're worried about fraud, manipulation, fair markets, orderly markets, you name it. That's the stuff that Trading and Markets is focused on. The Division of Corporate Finance is the one that deals with these S1s or prospectuses. And that process typically takes months to go through. With Bitcoin, they did it simultaneous to the process of getting the 19B4. So when you got those 19B4 approvals, the SEC also allowed those S1s to go effective, which means the Division of Corporate Finance went through all the risk disclosures, exactly how the funds are going to operate, and okayed all the language in those multi-hundred-page documents, right? That process was starting at zero as of the day before the 19B4 orders got through. We had heard from many people that the Division of Corporate Finance was not interacting, not even looking at these things. From what we understand, we don't even think the Division of Corporate Finance, based on different people I've spoken to, even knew these things were going to get approved until like the week of approval. So usually that process, we've seen it take up to 5 months. That's on the long end. More standard is 3 to 4 months. We are expecting this to be more expedited, obviously, especially if this is political. Who knows how long it's going to take? It could be a few weeks, but I think it's going to at least be a few weeks. We still haven't seen any movement. I thought we'd have a better idea by now. There's still no movement. And it's a long, arduous process. It's a lot of lawyer legal work going through these documents line by line and making sure all of this is okay.
Why did it happen at the same time as Bitcoin? Why did those two approval processes happen at the same time, and why didn't it happen with the Ethereum?
So that goes back to our theory that this was a complete decision, a political decision. So with the Bitcoin ETFs, it was the Grayscale lawsuit. The Grayscale won the lawsuit against the SEC, where the SEC denied GBTC to convert to an ETF. That decision happened in September. The SEC started conversations with the issuers in early October for those Bitcoin ETFs approvals that ultimately came in January. That tells us that the SEC was lined up and getting ready to go, and they knew they were going to approve these things. All lights were pointing green. That's why we went to 90% approval odds in the beginning of October, because that Division of Corporate Finance started talking to the issuers, which had never happened before. And we were like, this is a complete change of pattern. This has to only come from the top. That means these things are getting approved, whether or not, like, obviously Gensler wrote stuff afterwards saying he didn't want to do it, but he wanted to do it. So for us to see this, these 19B4s, seems like everyone was caught off guard. Every issuer that I've spoken to was not ready for this. Everyone I talked to thought they were going to be denied. So for them to flip 180 tells us, like, okay, they approved the 19B4s because they could do it quickly and it didn't need a ton of work. There was only a small set of comments. They changed a bunch of stuff. Most of it was minuscule. The only major thing was anyone who had a filing that allowed for staking, they took that out of the 19B4s, and then they were approved. But, so there's no staking, there's not going to be any staking in these ETFs for Ethereum, but there's no movement at all on these S1 documents, which tells us like it's going to be a long way out, because the fact that they did those both at the same time, it's normal for them to kind of start working this process once they know the approval is coming, so it's not all being forced on them at the last minute, tells us that this was a complete shift from the SEC.
When you say a political decision, can you maybe just, I mean, I have an idea of what you're saying, but maybe my idea is wrong. I mean, we see Trump, he's pro-Bitcoin, so maybe, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like,
yeah.
What does political decision mean?
Yeah, so I'll just lay out the timeline here.
Okay.
So May 8th was the day that the House voted on the SAB 121 bill, which is SAB 121 is the one, it basically makes it functionally impossible for a bank to custody any crypto assets, right?
Okay.
And the House was voting on whether or not to repeal it. That morning, the Biden admin, before the vote even happened, I think, or it might have happened after, it doesn't really matter. Same day, the Biden admin said, no matter what happens, if it's approved in the House or and the Senate, I'm going to veto it. So it's not going to happen no matter what. And still, a bunch of Democrats jumped over with the Republicans and voted to remove SAB 121, Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 from the SEC. That was shocking. I think that day, or I think it was the next day, was when Trump held his NFT fundraising dinner in Mar-a-Lago. Famously, Ryan Selkis of Masari was down there. There was a bunch of other executives down there. And he went on this speech basically saying, if you like crypto, vote for Trump, making fun of Biden, saying he doesn't even know what it is. And then I think also the Democrats likely did some polling and looked at what was happening here, because I don't think, there are a lot of people that are very pro-crypto. My question was always, is it enough to swing a vote? Like an actual decision, an election decision? Who knows? I guess that remains to be seen. Everyone here will tell you there is, and I mean, there's 10,000+ people here, so I don't know how many of them were going to vote Democrat, and because of Biden's crypto policies are now going to vote Republican. I've talked to a bunch, they're definitely out there. I just don't know how big of a deal that is. So I think the Dems looked at that. And then we had, the week before the approval of Ethereum ETFs, the Senate also voted. And keep in mind, in the House, Nancy Pelosi was one of the people that also voted to repeal SAB 121, which is a pro-crypto move. The Senate voted. People were hoping they would get a couple Senate Democrats. They got 12, including the majority leader, Chuck Schumer, which is arguably the second most powerful person in the Democratic Party. And that just kind of signals to us, oh wow, something's kind of happening. And we were thinking about this, and we were like, the SEC is still going to deny. From what I understand, it was after that, I think, that really things started changing at the SEC. Now, was that from the Biden admin down? Did it happen to do with a commissioner at the SEC? So the way the SEC is structured is a 5-member commission. Usually 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and then 1 person who's the chairman, in this case Gary Gensler, who's put there by the president, in this case Joe Biden. So usually whatever the president wants to happen, for the most part, he can make happen at the SEC. It's not supposed to be as political as it has become, but if you flipped one of those Democratic commissioners, theoretically you could get it. And also, if you're a Biden admin, you're like, this is bad for us for our votes for election. Trump is going to pull away some people. You're just kind of like, we can't do this. We're going to lose voters. So everything that I see, all the circumstantial evidence tells me that this was a political decision to approve these Ethereum ETFs. And while I say that, I will say we were bearish that they were going to be approved. I always thought the right decision was to approve these things. And I think the SEC got the decision correct here. I think they were just forced into it by the political movements of others.
So the question that I think is on everybody's minds, or a lot of people are now thinking, what will come next? Is there going to be like another sort of ETF that comes after Bitcoin and after Ethereum? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so even before we got Ethereum, even before we got Bitcoin, I was always telling everyone it's going to be Bitcoin and then Ethereum and then a long gap to anything else. That's still mostly my case, particularly if Biden wins again in November. I mean, things could get accelerated and changed, particularly get a market structure bill in Congress. FIT 21 was also voted on, and that also had 71 Democrats vote with the Republicans in the House. It's unlikely to pass in the Senate as it is, from what I'm talking to my policy experts. Again, we have a policy expert at Bloomberg Research, so I think you need a literal act of Congress to get anything else, but the way it sets up right now is you need a regulated market that you can surveil and look for fraud and manipulation. For the Ethereum ETFs and for the Bitcoin ETFs, that's the CME futures market, which is regulated by the SEC's sister agency, the CFTC, Commodities Futures Trading Commission. So you don't have anything for any other asset in the digital space. There are some that have more clear, like, is this a commodity or security? For the most part, like, the one I hear most often is Solana. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. You might need you need a new president, a new admin, potentially you need an act of Congress. The thing is, like, the CME just can't list Solana futures at this point. They would list them potentially as commodities futures. I don't know if the SEC would allow that to happen. So the SEC can kind of stop that and say, no, these are securities futures. And a lot of these lawsuits with Coinbase and Kraken, they have no problem citing Solana as a security. So some other ones, I mean, Litecoin, Doge, but I don't know how much demand there is from issuers to actually launch an ETF using those. And again, you still need some sort of futures or regulated market that they can surveil to look for fraud and manipulation. And even if you do get one of those markets, there needs to be significant trading and volume and exposure in those markets before you can, like, just because you have a futures market doesn't mean these things launch. I mean, Ethereum futures launched in like 2018, 2019, something like that. I might have gotten that wrong, but it's been 3+ years since before we got an Ethereum ETF. Theoretically, that gap could shorten if we get a regulated market. It doesn't have to be futures. If you get a spot market that comes under purview of the SEC or CFTC for some reason, that would count as a surveillable market. But you need something for the SEC to approve these things before you can get Solana, Ripple, or what have you. So even if they're designated not securities, no matter how you do it, you need a surveillable market.
Got it. Any final thoughts, James? We've said a lot. We've covered a lot. So anything we didn't cover? Predictions or?
Yeah. The number one question I've been getting recently is, all right, the 19B4s are approved. When are the ETFs going to launch? And that's that S1 process I talked about. And we kind of talked about the fact that it could take months. I think they're more inclined to move quicker. So I'm thinking, like, I think it'll be measured in weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2. I don't think it's going to be that 5-month mark, but time will tell. It'll be interesting to see. And the other thing is the creation redemption process, like with Bitcoin. So usually ETFs, you can basically hand over the underlying asset, get shares of the ETF in return, or vice versa, hand over shares of the ETF and get the underlying asset. There's only cash create in the Bitcoin. There's only going to be cash create in Ethereum. And the Ethereum ETFs are not going to allow staking, not remotely anytime soon. So I still think the SEC might try to call staked Ethereum a security, or they're still going after staking as a service. So all of that doesn't look great for the prospects of, like, Ethereum ETFs gaining tons of assets, but there will definitely be interest in these products when they launch. I just don't know when they're going to launch. If I had to put a number on it, I think it'll be over more than a couple weeks, but less than a couple months.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
See if your predictions are right.
Yeah. Hopefully they're better than our Ethereum ETF prediction, which was we didn't think it was going to happen, but for the most part, nobody else did.
I didn't think it was going to happen. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thanks.